Hi, it's Liz Sneddon. Let's have a look at ethics when we talk referring at level 1 of NCA. So one of the main ideas is about this idea of whakapapa, or genealogy. It's thinking about where the data comes from it. What was the purpose of collecting it? So thinking about some of the metadata of the data set itself. Another key concept of ethics is thinking about manaakitanga. So thinking about respect. So this includes cultural, social, and all other forms of respect when you're collecting the data. So being patient and understanding when people are stuck on something and asking politely, all those kinds of things. But it also refers to thinking about where we store the data and how we use the data. So is it being stored securely and safely? Is it being used in appropriate ways, or is it being used in inappropriate ways? Then we also need to think about consent. So we need people who do give us data, we need to ask their consent before we collect the data. So that consent should be free, and it needs to be done before we collect the data, and it needs to be informed consent, so saying what it is that they're consenting to and why. So what is the purpose behind your data collection? A third concept is kaiakitanga. So thinking about protection, the access, the use of the data. So where is that data going to be stored? How is it going to be stored securely? Because for example, privacy information, we want to make sure that people's private information is kept confidential. So thinking about those issues. It also thinks about the tikanga and the kawa, the processes, as well as our knowledge of these things. So here's an example. One of my classes is going to write a questionnaire for Akonga and asking about friends and friendships. So that's what the topic is, friends and friendships. So we did a brainstorm of what some of the ethical considerations are that we need to think about before we actually go ahead and write the questionnaire itself. So one of the ideas that we have to think about is about storing the information. So we want to make sure that we've got a statement at the start of the questionnaire so that people that are going to respond know that their data is going to be anonymous, so that we can't, for example, if it's asking questions about who their friends are, that we can't track them down and say, oh, why don't you like that person? So it needs to be anonymous. It needs to be stored securely in case there's any confidential information that comes through. We also need to make sure that there's a process to do that. So Kayako, the teacher, Mrs. Sneddon, I'll often store that myself, either in a locked file on my computer, or it could be in a locked drawer if I've got paper forms. So I need to think about these processes. Another thing to think about is the language that we use. When we write questions, we need to be sure that they're using neutral and respectful language. So don't ask them questions like, are you a loser with no friends? That's not particularly neutral. We want to ask a question which is open-ended, so we can say, how many friends do you have? And give some explanations of that. So we don't want to have any judgments that come into the wording of a question. And one of the things that we thought about doing was that we'll ask one of our English kaiako to check the wording of questions before we print it out and give it out to the students, so that we've had somebody look over that wording before we use it. A third idea that we had was that when we approach Akonga to ask if they're going to fill in this questionnaire for us, we need to be careful with our manners and our language that we use. So if somebody doesn't want to fill it in, we have to make sure we don't pressure them into doing it. We just need to politely say, okay, that's fine, thank you very much, and move on. So we've got to be quite respectful when we're asking people to fill in our questionnaire. So there's a few ideas about some of the ethics behind collecting data. Thanks for watching.